in today's discussion with our fantastic panel of HR leaders. So just a few bits to note before we get started. So this session is being recorded and the full webinar will be available for you to rewatch or share via iCommunity shortly after today's event. Thank you for being here. And I hope you're as excited as I am to hear from our brilliant panel this morning, who will be sharing real life experiences and insights on topics like human-centered leadership, employer branding, and how strong onboarding practices can lead to better long-term retention. So let's meet today's experts. First, we have Mandy Coalter, author and school mentor at Talent Architects. We also have Rachel Cooper, who is head of HR at the Grammar School at Leeds. We have Sophie Hull, who's Director of People at Wickham Abbey, and Tricia Howard, who's Director of HR at Latimer Upper School. So we're in for a really insightful session today. And without further ado, Mandy, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much for that. And thank you, everybody, for making the time to be here. We know it's a really busy time, isn't it? Picking up all those last minute challenges that we know HR people get thrown with last minute at the end of term. So it's great that you've made the time for a little bit of reflection, I guess, really, before we enter that summer period. And absolutely wonderful that Sophie, Tricia and Rachel have given up their time this morning as well. Really appreciate that. We wanted to just start the session, get in some of your thoughts as attendees, what's on your mind really at the moment, right now, as we're entering that summer period. We've got a couple of polls for you just to stimulate a little bit of reflection. So if we run the first poll, wondering what are some of your top people concerns at the moment? Retention of staff is the top concern coming up for people at the moment. I think that's really interesting actually, isn't it? Given all the other challenges that you've got going on. But actually good to know that we're still thinking hard about talent retention amongst all those other things that we're dealing with. Okay, thank you. So we've got another question, which is about your HR department. What are the things that, in terms of your function, your own role, your team, what are the things that perhaps are most pressing for you at the moment?
So it looks as if developing leaders, HR skills and knowledge.
So yeah, absolutely. So that combination of how do we manage through a difficult change period? And as you said earlier with the other results, and how do we retain people, the talent we need to retain through that difficult change? Developing leaders' skills and knowledge, isn't that always on our agenda as HR professionals? It's something that we always want to try and crack, but actually more important than ever, I guess, through difficult times when we need people to feel supported. But actually also it's interesting to see others are talking about HR systems and efficiency coming up, not a surprise there. Developing people strategy, data analytics, also getting a few results as well. Okay, that's really, really helpful because we'll cover some of those topics in today's session and, you know, hear from our three colleagues here who are like you tackling these things on the ground. And I want to start the questions really with thinking about us as a HR function, HR professionals, before we then start to think about how on earth we're helping our schools as well with some of those bigger picture issues. And you've talked in the polls there about HR efficiency and some of those challenges. And I'd love to get the thoughts from our panels about, you know, in terms of your HR function, what are some of the things that you're trying to do to make sure that you're lean, you're efficient, you're in that best place possible to support your school leaders? Perhaps if I could start with Sophie and get your thoughts on that, that'd be great.
Thanks, Mandy. So, yeah, I think time management and efficiency is something that we all probably struggle with a bit. It's really easy to get stuck down in the weeds and in that transactional area of HR. I think from my experience working in schools, we tend to be quite paper-based, and it's really automating those processes and systems to make sure that we can free up as much of our time as possible. So making sure we're using HR management systems, proper applicant tracking systems, automating the appraisal process, CPD processes, things like that. But it's not just bringing in systems for each of those and automating them, it's also making sure that those systems talk to each other. So we've brought in a lot of systems, And now we've realised they don't actually all talk to each other, and so we're having problems then with our payroll system that doesn't talk to our HR management system. So we're having to duplicate a lot of effort around that as well. So it's thinking about automating, but also thinking strategically about how these systems can talk to each other so that you can avoid that duplication of effort.
Thank you, Sophie. That's really, really helpful to understand. I often hear stories of a new starter being input up to 8 different times in a school on different systems, and that is super inefficient, isn't it? So the more we can eliminate that, I'm not sure we're at the point yet where we can get one, but if we can reduce that, it's a big amount of time. Thanks. Okay. Tricia, any reflections from you on that area?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Sophie said. I think there's also an element of kind of putting the ownership on the individuals. So if you've got a system, there may be elements that they can do and manage themselves. So for example, recording their absence, recording their holidays, lots of little smaller bits that people can kind of own themselves. If you've got a self-service portal, I think that's really useful to think about. There might be an element of oversight to make sure that people are doing that correctly. But I think kind of putting the onus where you can back on the employee or the line manager is also really useful to think about.
Great. So really pushing on that self-service agenda, which of course will need a lot of hand-holding, won't it, as well? Because that's quite a shift, a change in practice. Great. Thanks, Tricia. Rachel.
Yeah, I think complementing what Sophie and Tricia said. So we did similar. We introduced a new system 3 years ago now, and I think one of the learnings we took from that is it's quite people were quite nervous of a new system coming in. They thought there's a little bit of Big Brother is watching them, and there really wasn't, because some of the information we held, we just didn't hold it for the colleagues to see themselves. It was just sitting in the background, often on a million spreadsheets. And I was a bit shocked when I joined the sector how many spreadsheet people management is managed on. So yeah, working towards one system has been fabulous. I think what really resonated for me was giving that visibility to line managers as well. I remember having a conversation with a head of department who was sharing with me he didn't know what his team got paid, which was a real shock, because actually their accountability range is slightly based around some of the remuneration that goes with their role. So actually letting the line manager see that, letting the line managers have real visibility of their team's attendance, because we were saying, you need to see the whole record for your colleagues. It's really hard. Often the head of department doesn't necessarily see where their teams are on a daily basis, do they, when they're out and about and teaching and busy. So that real one focus, one area for information was really important for us. So I agree. So employee self-serve was really important, but that line manager visibility meant so much. And then I guess for us as HR professionals and for our leadership team, it then helps with data-driven decisions, because we all know what gets measured gets managed. So it really helps kind of move us more into the strategic HR and out of some of those weeds that Sophie talked about. But I think we're all aware our roles sometimes are transactional, aren't they? And there are times in the year when more so. But yeah, a HR system I think really enables us to deliver better outcomes.
That's great. Thank you, Rachel. And I think from everything you've said there as well, you've helped us think about what's the business case for this investment, because it's hard sometimes to get investment when times are tough. But actually, if you can demonstrate we'll be more efficient in the way we do things, we'll help line managers be more efficient as well as, of course, impacting that whole branding piece, isn't it? If you're giving employees access to these things in an era where, of course, that is nowadays expected. So I think it really helps us craft that. I'll be interested perhaps later on in the webinar, if we've time, to come back to AI as well, and how we're just starting to think about AI in the HR arena. And if anybody on the session is already in that space, then do pop some thoughts in chat or any questions as well about how AI might be able to, I guess, really boost this efficiency agenda that we really do need to make. And of course, as Rachel was just reflecting there, if we start to manage the transactional piece better, more smoothly, and we've got data to drive our insights, it gives us the opportunity to be more strategic in our role in HR, and to actually spend our time supporting schools with some of those bigger challenges. So again, coming back to the panel, I'm interested to hear some thoughts on, how can we ensure that HR can play that strategic role rather than simply focus on the transactional. What do you think are the key ingredients for us as professionals to get into that strategic space and you know, really working with the SLT on some of the bigger agenda that we'll talk about in a minute? Maybe Tricia, if I could come to you first on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's not only the senior leadership, it's also, I'm sure we've all got governing bodies as well. And I think it's showing the strategic impact of HR there. So one of the things that we do have an HR system, and we spend quite a lot of time. In fact, I've got one member of the team who specifically looks after the system and producing data from that. And I think we spend quite a lot of time looking at what the data tells us. And actually, we've developed a data dashboard, which we present to the senior management team and governors as well, giving them an overview of what our staff workforce is looking like through the life of our strategic plan. And I think by kind of demonstrating that value added, that we can look at what the data is telling us, we can look at what's coming down the road, we can begin to be more strategic in terms of, you know, for example, if we've got a lot of people that we've identified who are stuck in middle leadership roles or moving towards retirement, actually that level of analysis then allows you to think, well, actually, you know, what do we need to do in terms of the type of people that we need to recruit, those that we need to actually retain, and in order to drive that strategic plan forward. So I think a lot of it is around the data-driven decisions that you can demonstrate and the value added that you can demonstrate to the senior management team and also the governing body.
It's quite a theme coming up here, isn't there, around data, because it's like evidence-based for everything we do, and resources are always tight. You can't do everything, so you need to be super sharply focused and know what the things are that are going to make the biggest impact. I love that, Tricia. Thank you. Really great tip. Sophie, I'll come to you next. That's okay.
So I completely agree with Tricia. I think the data is really important, and using that when you're making decisions. I also think if you really want HR to play a strategic role, and this obviously doesn't necessarily sit with people on this call, but to have HR on the senior leadership team is really, really helpful, to be actually at the table involved in those strategic discussions, to have a separate people or HR board meeting as well, where the board, the governing body, are actually focused on HR as well, and are seeing how HR are feeding into that strategy as well. So I think that is really important, really understanding your customer, and that's the staff, obviously, in the school, and the different challenges that they face at all levels. So making sure that you're talking to them, you're understanding where they're coming from. And we've moved to more of a business partnership model within our department. So I have one member of the team who is a business partner to teaching staff, and I have another member of the team who's a business partner to support staff. And a big part of their role is really partnering and advising and consulting with those different parts of the school, to really get under the skin and understand what it is that's important to them, what their challenges are, how we can help address them, because it is very much about, on the retention side, which is obviously something that everyone's focused on, really understanding how we can make their experience at school better. So moving away from being quite so transactional, when they join, when they leave, making sure you've got all the checks in place, but really focusing on that current experience and what they're going through here as well.
Wonderful, Sophie. And I know from having worked with your school how seriously they took the role of the people HR function. I guess it is probably still unusual to have that SLT membership, but it's a real signal, isn't it? We might also want to reflect throughout the session, and again, people, please do pop in chat. If you haven't got that seat at the top table, kind of how do you earn it? How do you influence as well, when that's perhaps a challenge for you? Rachel, any thoughts from you on how we start to be more strategic?
Yeah, I think following on from Sophie's point, because my role's on the SLT as well, and I do agree that does make our roles a lot easier in terms of influencing at strategic level. But I think what's really important is when we look at people intervention, that they're not seen as a HR plan or a HR strategy, because actually it's a leadership team's focus, isn't it? It's not about HR delivering it. And I think as HR leaders, we are typically completer finishers. We are very efficient people. I think it comes as the nature of the types of roles that we do. But I do think that buy-in to some of these plans absolutely should be at a whole school level. What our role then is to advocate for it, to champion it, to make sure that that kind of thread is weaved through everything we do, and pulling people back to it. But I think one of the successes we've seen in terms of our wellbeing strategy is it's not seen as a people plan. Sorry, the HR plan, it's seen as a whole school people plan. And we embraced colleague experience as well as pupil experience. So it is a holistic plan rather than a HR strategy that we roll out and we share with the governors and we share with the leadership team at a timely point. And I think that's how you embed a culture of change. And that's where we've seen some of the biggest benefits in terms of the colleague experience.
That's wonderful, Rachel. I do a lot of work with schools on developing people strategy. And really, for me, the measure of success here is if I can walk into any classroom or any area of the school, you know, talk to the catering staff, talk to the ground staff, and they know what that people strategy vision is. And it's really simple and it's really accessible and they all understand it. And often you're absolutely right. Traditional HR strategies kind of might be a 50-page document in somebody's desk. Very, very different concept, isn't it? So I really love that. And also, I think that's how we get leaders really engaged in some of this work, which we all said earlier we need to do. So compelling, simple, easy people strategies and working with leaders to help them understand why this really matters to them. The impact it's going to have on the education ultimately. Fantastic, thank you. Some great tips there, I think, being data and evidence driven in what you do. Think about your positioning in the school and how you're using business partnering to be proactive and not just deal with, you know, perhaps the reactive HR work that comes in, and then thinking about that really compelling lived and breathed people strategy. Those are wonderful tips for being more impactful. But I think it also comes back to where we started, which is to get the time and capacity to do those things. You know, we need to automate and be efficient and make sure our teams are super lean. And then we need to think about our professional development, because operating in that space is perhaps a little bit different to where we've been traditionally as an HR function. Wonderful. So that's discussing all things HR and as a professional body. I want to now move us into thinking much more about some of those broader issues in terms of our workforce. And lots of people said in the poll that retaining staff is a really critical priority at the moment. Might be a bit of a surprise because, of course, you know, there's a lot of efficiency going on in the sector as well. But it's great to see everybody recognising that talent retention through that actually really, really matters, because that's ultimately how we're going to continue to deliver excellent education. So I'd love to hear from the panel from each of you, really. What do you think is the biggest challenge at the moment facing staff retention in independent schools today, and how are you tackling this in your school? And maybe this time we can start with Rachel.
Yeah, sure. I think there's probably two different elements to come at this question from. There's one kind of looking at the teaching colleagues, and then there's another one looking at support colleagues. And I'll probably start with support colleagues, because I think sometimes they get a little bit forgotten in a school's environment. And I'm sure other schools will see the same as us, that we have more than 50% of our workforce is made up by colleagues, support colleagues. And they enable the teachers to do their teaching. So a really critical role for us. And one of the trends we've seen, certainly post-COVID, in more of our kind of professional services roles, is the world of work outside of the sector for them in those types of roles. And I guess you can include our types of roles in the same conversation. You know, we would be working in more of an agile way. We wouldn't be in the office 5 days a week. So that's really one area we've put a lot of thought into post-COVID, because if we're going to attract and retain people, we have to think differently about flexible working. Flexible working is growing year on year. We see the number of flexible working requests increasing. But I think as a sector, we're still a little bit immature to it. And I think there's still lots of room for growth in that area. You know, when I joined, I saw some challenges that colleagues' working hours and some of the main support roles were for an 8 a.m. start. Well, if anyone's ever been to the grammar school at Leeds, getting anywhere near the school at 8 a.m. is impossible. In fact, getting anywhere into Leeds at 8 a.m. is impossible because of that traffic from the driveway of parents dropping off and buses dropping off. pretty much blocks up the ring roads. So sometimes it's just about thinking really creatively about how can we do things differently. So do you know what? Let's not schedule a start time for 8 a.m. Let's not schedule interview start times for 8 a.m. because that's not given a great impression of the school from day one. So I think we've really challenged ourselves to think differently about how we do things. For some support roles now, we do embrace home working. Certainly out of term time, we try to think how we can work differently. And so myself and the team, we work remotely outside of term time, even into their might share work remotely 1 day a week. And that makes a real difference when we go back to thinking about how we are more strategic, actually getting that headspace, not having people knocking on your door. And, you know, as great as it is that, you know, we've got a really open door policy, sometimes you do need to take a step back, don't we, and think, oh, I just need to think more strategically, and I can't do that when I'm in the weeds on a day-to-day basis. So I think definitely thinking more creatively about some of our flexible working propositions. And then I guess probably from a teaching side, obviously we know the challenges in terms of pay, in terms of pensions. We know the rhetoric in terms of the state sector, that, you know, certainly in some cases pay is catching up. We do run the risk, don't we, in the next couple of years that we will fall behind from a pay perspective, when historically we've always tried to pay more where we can so we can attract and retain the best colleagues. But I think when we think about pay, what we're trying to encourage people to think about is the overall package, because actually in some ways we compare apples and pears when we're looking at the state sector, because actually they are very different roles. You know, they're tackling very different pupil issues, they're tackling very different workload issues. So I think we try really hard to talk to our colleagues around the overall remuneration package. And when we do our annual reward statements, we talk about all the additional benefits that you get from working in the independent sector, which isn't necessarily just always about base pay. But I think it's something we're really mindful of at the moment, and trying to think about how do we remind our colleagues actually the reasons that they work here isn't just down to basic pay. And I always think, you know, as much as people tell us that they're going to leave and they're going to go to the state sector because they pay more, they don't actually leave. So we must be a good place to work.
Great, thanks, Rachel. We'll come back to this theme about employer branding later as well, and, you know, that clear sense of what the school stands for, because I think you're right to be reflecting on big boosts in pay in the state sector. Of course, TPS will remain in the state sector. So immediately, depending on your local labour market, and other opportunities for those schools, there's certainly very much a potential risk there, isn't there, in terms of retention. And of course, there's lots going on in the state sector around flexible working and workload, etc., which actually, you know, I always encourage independent schools to learn from and, you know, tap into some of that practice if possible, because it'll also help in our environment. Okay, thank you. Sophie, what are your thoughts on the big challenges right now?
I agree. I think one of the big ones is the flexible hybrid working requests, and schools, just by their very nature, your pupils are in school, so teachers need to be in school, and they like to have support staff in school to support them. But we're moving as well much more towards offering hybrid and flexible working. The other area I think that's challenging can be around career progression, and really for both on the teaching side and the support side, because just the structure of schools and the way that we're set up means that there needs to be a vacancy above in order for somebody to move up. We have the structures in place. Generally, those are the structures that work for the school. So restructuring is less possible and less likely. So it's creating career pathways, both for teachers and for support staff, and making sure there's a really strong professional development program in place so that people feel they are developing and they can grow. And also highlighting to them, and I think this is true on both sides, actually, for both teachers and support staff, but really highlighting to them what they can do at school in order to expand their capabilities and their skills. It may not necessarily be a promotion now, but it means that when a promoted post comes up, they can demonstrate that they have the skills and the capabilities needed to fulfill that role. So taking up those additional responsibilities, which might be running the Duke of Edinburgh programme or running the debating society or whatever it is, so that they are in a strong position when those promoter posts do come. But we're starting to focus quite heavily now on creating pathways for both teachers and support staff.
Great, thanks, Sophie. Very, very important area if we know that people are leaving for progression. Tricia, what are your challenges and priorities?
Yeah, I mean, I think career progression, and I think it's, you know, you kind of need to look for where you can add opportunities. And I think you have to accept that you might not necessarily have the next step for everybody. So some of the things that we've done are kind of introducing roles as a teacher mentor and a HOD mentor that give individuals opportunity to grow into leadership. And our HOD mentor position sits on the senior management team. So actually that gives an opportunity for people to be involved in strategic decision making. I think also another thing is the kind of the flexibility, and we've been particularly looking at that for teachers, because I think it's easier to offer an element of hybrid working for support staff, but we've actually managed to introduce an element of it for teachers by looking at the school day, and if by putting form period in the middle of the day, it actually means that our staff potentially don't necessarily have to be in for period 1 or period 7, and that's brought us huge engagement from staff. You know, a male member of staff recently commented to me that it's fantastic to be able to go and pick up his daughter from school. Now that might be once a fortnight, but it makes a huge difference. And I think there, you know, it's a challenge really to kind of look at, if we manage to run schools completely remotely during COVID, why can't we take some of that learning and bring it back into the way that we run schools now? And I think some of HR is kind of at that strategic level is just challenging. Actually, we did it then. We didn't have everybody present and we still ran an education service. So why can't we think a little bit differently and offer that flexibility, which I think is a huge driver in terms of retention across the piece.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that, Tricia. And I think you're absolutely right. Flexible working is here to stay. It's just thinking about how we adapt it to a school context, isn't it? And actually, when our staff see that we're doing what we can, that makes the world of difference to retention. I think, you know, teachers and educators, you know, they've got common sense. They know that they can't necessarily work from home every day of the week, but they want to see their school embracing the possibility, the art of the possible. And it's wonderful to hear that you're all looking at that, whether it's those teaching or those supporting them. There is a fantastic programme of flexible working ambassador programmes in the state sector, which you can easily access lots of video content on how schools are making flexible working work. So encourage people to take a look at that if that's a challenge for you. And we've heard a lot about career progression. What do we do when people get stuck? And traditionally, we've had reasonable retention in a lot of independent schools, which is great, but can then create those bottlenecks. So how do we think about those pathways, that development, except that sometimes it's good news when people move on and they may well come back if we build that great relationship, and mentoring playing a really big role there as well. Rachel mentioned right at the start of that conversation about our workforce and that holistic perspective. Yes, we have lots of people teaching, but actually we have an enormous amount of people working alongside those teachers day in, day out. And I think every school I work with has a bit of a challenge about that sense of one team in that culture. And some obviously are much better at this than others, but you know, there's very few that would admit that they've got this perfectly sorted. And one of the things I often reflect on is, could we just say everybody is an educator in school? And some educate in the classroom, some educate in different ways. You know, it's a bit like that man on the moon concept. If we start to talk about we are all educators, it's just we're playing a different part in the children's education. Some of us are feeding them or making the grounds look beautiful, or, you know, doing the extracurricular stuff or whatever it might be. So there's a thought for us all, I think, in terms of language and inclusivity. Okay, so retention's a big challenge, but we have also obviously got some difficult things we might be facing. You know, there may be people on this session who are having to look again at the pension scheme costs, thinking about being more efficient in staffing, starting to look at things like, you know, cost per lesson and how productive Are our teachers being thinking about pay and allowances, all of that stuff, which is pretty difficult, isn't it? Particularly as Rachel said, when you might see some competition from other schools in your area. So just love to hear from the panel about how you think through difficult change, sometimes we're doing things that people might feel uncomfortable about. How do we take people with us and make sure they feel they've got a sense of agency and voice during that process? And if I could start this time with Tricia, that would be lovely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really is about listening and communicating. And I think if you're going through a major change, you also need to think about who's going to be involved in that. So it's not just, again, it's not just HR sitting at the centre of that. It's about those that are in involvement with the staff, whether it's the head of department, whether it's their line manager. But actually, I think it's about them understanding the process and having the skills and the expertise to take people through change. I think no matter what the change journey is, whilst you can understand potentially the rationale, the business rationale for change, there is always an element of the personal impact. And I think you really, really have to recognise that. And you have to be willing to really listen, and I mean actively listen to the feedback from those that are going through that change. I think communication is absolutely key, and it needs to be empathetic and really genuine communication that comes out. And I think people also need to kind of be guided in terms of how they take a sense of ownership in that change, because I think that it can be very much that the organisation is enforcing this change and I'm rebelling against it. But actually, you need to get everybody to a sense where they have a voice in that and they're recognised for that. And I think, absolutely, it's always very difficult to take through people through change. But I think if you can, excuse me, really demonstrate that there is a real kind of empathy for individual experience within that, and you're managing that within a change process, then I think it pays huge dividends.
Great, thank you, Tricia. Hearing a lot there about being human-centered, really, thinking about that impact on people with deep empathy and giving them real opportunities to voice concerns, because we don't always have everything right, do we? And it's important to hear from people about how maybe we can shape that change in a better way. Sophie, what are your thoughts on that challenge?
Yeah, I just completely agree with Tricia. I think it's about communication and that active listening. And as you were talking, I was thinking back, we exited TPS last year, and the consultation process we went through was really interesting and incredibly smooth. We were very lucky. We had one of our governors who was chairing that, and we had reps, 5 or 6 reps from the staff body. And he was so good at that active listening and really being empathetic and understanding the human impact and the personal impact that this was going to have on people. The only thing I would add is that I think it's important when you go into these processes that you also are, and senior leadership are aware and prepared that they may need to slightly change what their plan is and really take account of what people are saying. And if there's something that you can reasonably change in your plan, then do it, so that they really do feel listened to and part of the process. We've just been through a culture audit as well, and one of the main things that came out from that was around communication and collaboration when we're trying to implement change, and making sure that we are talking to staff and bringing them with us rather than just this top down, this is what we're doing. That's when people tend to get upset. So yeah, I would just completely agree with Tricia.
Great, love that idea of a cultural audit as well. Actually, maybe at the start of the change process, so you know where your current strengths are and maybe where you may need to invest more effort in helping people go through that process. Great, thank you, Sophie. Rachel, your thoughts?
I guess to add to what's already been shared, I think that the key is to think about when you've maybe been through some of these difficult exercises. It could be a restructure, it could be a consultation, it could be that maybe people have had to part company as part of that. There is this real kind of survivor syndrome that we've got to think about. And I think we're all guilty, aren't we, sometimes, that we get to the end of a project and we go, oh, okay, we're done now, business as usual. And actually, colleagues have been through a really difficult journey as they've gone through that, and everyone's experiences will have been totally different. You know, the dreaded R word, you know, redundancies have never really been talked about in the school that I work within. So it was a real shock. Even using the word redundancy, people felt really uncomfortable about. And I said, you know, we have to be really open and honest and transparent with people. You know, we're very fortunate we're not in that situation. But people need to know that is, you know, something in the course of normal business that we shouldn't be afraid of. But what's so important is, you know, we're always communicating, even if there is no immediate pressure. You know, we try every year to make sure as part of our inset programme that we are giving a financial update, so nothing's ever a surprise to colleagues. And I think they then feel like they're part of the journey, they're part of the solution. And then if you do have to have those difficult conversations at some point, they understand the why behind it. And I always think it's really hard to argue with logical decision making, isn't it? So if people can understand the situations that we're going through, they will be more on board. Will be great advocates as part of that process. So I think just that communication kind of before you're in the situation, during these really torrid times, and then post, so that everybody feels like, okay, this hasn't gone away, we still need to keep talking, however we felt has been acknowledged as part of these difficult processes, and keeping that dialogue going, I think, is really important.
Great, thank you for that, Rachel. So what I'm hearing there is that real transparency and sharing information. I think sometimes we hold that back, don't we, for all sorts of reasons. And some things do have to be confidential, but actually asking ourselves the question, why shouldn't people know and understand this is the picture? They're adults, and actually if it's going to impact them at some point, then let's talk about it, and let's get them sharing with us that challenge and what the options are to manage it in a human-centered way, as Tricia said, really treating people as individuals, giving them that time and space, and Sophie's thoughts around, you know, thinking hard about where your culture is. It's really difficult, I think, to implement tough change if you've perhaps got a bit of a them and us culture to start with, because all you'll get, of course, is division. So really understanding, have we built a strong culture where everybody feels like they're in this together in this school? It's going to help you weather storms, because there'll always be storms ahead no matter what they are, won't there? So some great tips there, thank you. And we may well again come back to that if we get time at the end. If anybody listening has got some thoughts about how do you equip leaders to lead through that difficult change, please pop some thoughts in chat. I want to come back to one of the issues I think Rachel raised earlier, which was about the offer in the independent school world. And when we're recruiting, which we still are, even through, you know, times of efficiency, we're still going to need that teacher in that classroom. How do we make sure we've got a really strong employer brand out there, which is really a marketing task nowadays, isn't it? And how are we collaborating with our colleagues in marketing to really sell the offer and make ourselves very, very attractive, rather than perhaps relying on certain publications to just advertise roles? So love to hear from the panel about what your thoughts are on how to get the employer brand right, and how do you sell, you know, what your culture is like, your offer is like in your school when you're recruiting new staff. If I can come to Rachel first, that would be great.
Yeah, so we've done a lot of work on this, because we recognise that is the first part of the journey, isn't it, in terms of attracting candidates to our school, because the first place they will go to is our website when they see a vacancy. And so therefore, when they go onto your website, it's really important that they get that feel of, I can see myself working there, or that workplace reflects me and reflects my culture, from an EDI perspective. But the best form of insight we found in that area is actually talking to our new starters, because they've been through that journey and they've formed that opinion of us early on. So we've done lots of work with our new starters to say, talk to us about what attracted you to the school, talk to us about what your first impressions were before you even came to interview. And we do that as part of stay surveys, we do that as part of our new starter listening groups. And I think that's been really insightful for us. And that's helped us look at what is that offer that we are trying to market to new colleagues. Most of us have kind of experts in our schools, don't we, with our external relations or our marketing teams. So I think it's, how do we tap into those teams? and how do we use social media to help us with some of that. So we're obviously really conscious that social media has kind of two roles to play. From a parent's perspective, they want to see the fabulous things that are happening from a pupil perspective. But we also know whenever we have a really difficult role to fill, as soon as we put it on our social media, that the flow through of applicants is so much greater. So I'm not necessarily advocating every role going on social media, but there is definitely some linkage between those two. And I think the other thing we've done lots of work on is our candidate brochures over the year, because again, that's that real kind of first thought of, I guess, the professionalism that we want to demonstrate, and the warmth and encouragement in our school, and that's the message we want to get across to colleagues when they join us. So why do you want to work at Grammar School at Leeds? How will we make you feel part of our family? So yeah, I think looking at all of those areas, what do we want to be famous for? How do we want to come across to those new candidates? And then how do we then put that into practice?
Great. Lots of great tips there, Rachel. Thank you for that. Sophie, what about you and your school in this space?
Yeah, I agree with Rachel. The recruitment collateral is so important. And in addition to the brochure, we also have a recruitment video that's of our staff talking about what it is like to work there. And then and that's both teaching staff and support staff, and they can see the diversity of our staff body and what it is that they really value about working here. And staff testimonials as well on your website can really help with that as well. The other thing that we're starting to focus on a bit more now too is really emphasising our values and making sure that people who join have values that align with ours, and so that tends to lead to better retention, we hope. And so we're bringing values-based questions into our interviews as well to really emphasise the importance of our values to us, and making sure that people are comfortable with them and that they feel that they align to them as well. And then the third piece is the onboarding. So I think it's quite easy sometimes with HR. You can be very busy, particularly in peak recruitment times, is that as soon as somebody has signed their contract and offer letter, it's like, phew, great, move on to the next one. And they can slightly get forgotten between that point of signing and the point of joining. And sometimes for us, we'll be appointing teachers in November who are starting the following September. So we've got a really long period of time where they can feel quite disconnected from us. So we've looked at lots of ways of how we can stay in touch with them. So we have parent newsletters that go out to the parent body, which our communications and marketing department manage, and we add them to the list for that. So it goes out every 2 weeks, so they can see what's happening in school during that time. We assign them a buddy, and who is someone who is not in their department, and their line manager. We let them both know and ask them both to reach out to them before they join, so that they've got a contact with somebody that they can talk to, either about the job itself or just about working here. So we look at lots of different ways to see how we can fill that period of time between signing and joining to make sure that their experience is generally very positive. And we find that really helps once they join. We do those surveys as well that Rachel was talking about. That has really helped in terms of people settling quickly and feeling that, you know, it's a good place that they're coming to.
That's great, Sophie. We know, don't we, evidence tells us onboarding is really critical to hitting the ground running, but also longer term retention. So really paying attention to that period, and it tells people, doesn't it, what your culture's like, how you care about people if you really go that extra mile. So I think there's some brilliant tips there. Thank you. Tricia, your reflections about the
there are a
employer
couple
branding.
of things that I would add. I think we're also beginning as independent schools to have to fight against this culture of independent schools and privilege linked with the VAT on fees. And I think increasingly I'm coming across candidates who are having a moral dilemma in terms of applying to come to an independent school. So I think there is an awful lot about, you know, really portraying what the culture is really like. You know, we might look like an independent privileged school, but actually, you know, are you aware of our bursary programme? Are you aware of all of the things that we give back to the community in our school? So I think it's about being, you know, having an honest reflection of the culture. I think also from our point of view, again, in terms of honesty, we're not ethnically diverse in terms of our teaching population, and I suppose that's probably a problem across the independent school. So it's also being honest, we're on our journey. We'd love you to apply, and we'd love you to come here. We hope we've got a culture that allows you to belong, but actually, we are on our journey. So there's an element of honesty in that as well. And I think also it's about really looking at all of the touch points in that candidate journey and thinking about it in terms of, we're really, really good about our employer brand for or our branding for parents, but we should be doing the same with our prospective applicants as well. So looking at their experience, and we should be looking after them as well as we do a parent. And I would like every member of staff who applied to come here, even if they're not actually successful at the end of it, they've got a positive story about their experience that then kind of builds into that word of mouth as well. So we survey every single applicant, whether they're shortlisted, whether they come to interview, whether they're actually appointed, and ask them, what was your experience, and use that information to try and improve that experience. And that could be from, on your website you said this, but actually when I came I didn't feel it, or I was interviewed by an all-female panel, and actually I need to see myself in that panel. Lots and lots of touch points that really ensure that the experience that you give your applicants is the very best it can be, because I think we have to recognise we're in an increasingly competitive market.
Wonderful, Tricia. I'm a big advocate of feedback throughout the whole process, and yet it's rare to find it in the way that you're doing it, to such depth, asking people at every stage of the process. It's great to ask our new starters, but actually those that didn't make it, what did they think, and have they gone away with a positive view so they may come back in future? So absolutely brilliant that you've looked for that honest feedback. You've talked about honest messaging there as well in your communication, but also maybe smashing some of the myths around what it's actually like to be in an independent school. Some brilliant tips. I think one of the things that's really important to think about is going right back to where we started this session, is that kind of super efficient process for the candidate and for you in schools, and having applicant tracking systems that really manage that really smoothly is vital. Might allow you to build talent pools as well of people that you might not have a vacancy for today, but might be interested tomorrow. And then your employer brand is always on. It's not just a recruitment campaign when you have a vacancy. It's always on, because what you want is when you have a vacancy, people already know about you, they've heard about you, they're hearing good stories. And I think the best way maybe of starting to put your employer brand out there is collecting stories from your staff, as you've all been saying, and maybe just shift 10% of your social media content to be about people working in school. If you can get it up to 20%, great. You'll probably find at the moment most of it, 100%, is about pupils, understandably, but we can just shift it a little bit, nudge that dial, get our people telling the stories about how great we are. Immediately you're switching your employer brand on there, and then backing that up with your website and all of those different things that you've all talked about. Absolutely fantastic, loads of tips there. Thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to check now if we've got any questions from our participants in the chat. So just having a look. Is anybody wanting to ask a question? Please do pop something in chat or raise a hand if you want to come off mute and raise a question. I think the chat function is probably the easiest way, though. Give you a minute. Just while I give people a minute to do that, I would love to just come back to each of you and just say, look, if you were to just sum up, this is how we make a difference in our HR team, in our school. This is what's our kind of North Star. In a really punchy way, what would that be for each of you? Sophie, we'll start with you.
I would say prioritise staff voice, really listen actively to what people are saying, and prioritise the school culture, and make sure you're using data and technology.
Great, thank you. Fantastic, very punchy as well. Thank you. Tricia, what would it be for you?
So I think for me, it's creating that outstanding employee experience. And I think you just need to look at all of the touch points that that an employee has, and make sure that, you know, you're really adding value for that. And I think if your employee is happy, then and they're having a great experience, then I think it's going to answer an awful lot of the other challenges that we've talked through.
Yeah, love that, Tricia. And we must never forget, must we, that there is a stack of evidence that says the thing that has the biggest impact on educational outcomes for young people is the people teaching them. And clearly we want those people to be motivated, engaged, well in front of those pupils, and supported by all those wonderful people that are around them in school. Lovely, thank you. Rachel, what about for you?
I think for me, it's all around the engagement. So, you know, building like a really authentic and open communication style. And I think that's what really makes the difference. And that's what I think if we sat outside and asked any of our colleagues, any of our teaching or support colleagues, that's what they would say was really important to them from a HR perspective. And then again, secondly, if I'm allowed a second one, 2 stars, I think it's the HR voice at a senior level, because I think that's what makes the real difference in independent schools, when we can influence strategically and really advocate for the people championing makes a real difference.
And we could do a whole other session, couldn't we, on how you secure that voice? What's the journey as a professional? But I think, again, throughout the whole session, you've given lots of tips about, you know, being evidence-based, being focused on what matters to the leaders, working alongside the leaders. It's building our credibility, really, isn't it? I love that around the it's kind of authentic, inclusive leadership that we're trying to create in our schools, which matters day in, day out. But I think even more so when you're going through a bit of a stormy period in a sector, which of course we are. And actually what's going to get you through it with your staff is if they do genuinely feel connected to leaders and feel that leaders care about them through that process. Okay, just checking. I can't see any questions, Lucy, unless I've missed any. Please shout if I have. Can't see anything in the Slido. So I'll take the liberty and ask one last one myself then, if that's okay. And it comes back to what we talked about earlier, that actually how leaders lead is really what can help us be most successful as people, HR professionals. It's that day in, day out leadership, isn't it? What happens when an individual goes to their head of department or SLT member and how that's managed. So your final thoughts on how do you work with leaders to build that I guess, that authentic, engaging leadership style? Sophie, I'll start with you.
I would bring that back to communication. Leaders are always busy. It's very difficult to pin them down sometimes, but I will actually work in time into their diaries so that I'm meeting with them regularly, so you can really understand what their issues are, and then you can demonstrate to them very clearly how HR can contribute to, you know, help them resolve those issues. And that is when they start to build their belief in HR as a strategic partner as well.
Great. So making the time and looking at problem solving rather than perhaps just, you know, that immediate problem, but thinking ahead about how we might stop this happening in the first place if we collaborate together. Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Tricia, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it is very much. I mean, there are key people who I have regular meetings with in my diary. And I think it's also about, you know, we're very lucky in independent schools, as opposed to a lot of our large organisations, that we've got HR teams on site, whether they're there all of the time or not. But I think it's about us having an open door and being very welcoming, being very clear in terms of whether they actually want an answer or they just want to talk through a problem and they want some coaching. Most of the time, most people want answers. And it's about, you know, providing those answers, that support and the guidance. And sometimes having conversations with people about, well, let's talk through what you're going to say. Let you have a run through with me. And, you know, it's all about building those relationships, giving that really, really coherent advice, and then being there also if it doesn't work out perhaps the way that they wanted to, but really being that kind of visible support function, I think, for staff across the school.
Great, love that visibility. What we don't want is seen to be locked behind closed doors and people can't access us, but really being around the school, being part of the school life, being part of the school culture. So people know that we're by their side working with them. That's wonderful. And Rachel, your reflections.
Yeah, I think it's, as you say, being aligned, looking at how HR and our people interventions interface with the whole school development plan, because ultimately that's what we're all working towards, no matter our individual roles within that. And then Sophie touched on it earlier on in terms of business partnering, so really being seen as a department who will enable the business to deliver, the school in this case, the best possible outcomes for the colleagues and indirectly then for the pupils. And I think that's what makes the real difference.
Great, thank you. Business partnering, if we get it right, can be so impactful, can't it? And one of the reflections I've got on this theme is how much we invest in developing leaders as leaders of people and teams. And traditionally, we haven't put that investment in the school sector. And we're not the only sector that tends to promote people because they're a good professional rather than necessarily a good leader. And it's certainly something I'm doing a lot of work on at the moment, because I feel leaders have a right to great professional development, to lead people and teams. It's not easy, is it, leading people, particularly through difficult change. And it sounds like all of you have got that on your radar. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much to our fantastic panel. I mean, I've just been blown away by today's session. Lots of great tips, some really wonderful work going on in your schools. I hope everybody listening has got some good takeaways from it. Really enjoyed it, and wish you all the best for a restful summer. Get that break you need when it comes, and look forward to hearing how you continue with that work in the term ahead. Thank you.